first up, I see that, just keep track of, turn these things into abstract. So Harvard is a university, talking of the same university, same organization, and the difference between, uh, you know, something till the recent digital boom, the AI based digital boom, or say the massive online learning digital boom. There have been multiple digital booms, but the latest one, right? So same organization, and compared for, the since its very beginning, the entire phase, and the very recent time. So comparing two phases of the same organization. And in the same spirit, there are more unique visits each to WebMD network than to all the doctors in the United States. So here we are comparing two different entities, right? Unlike the previous sentence. So one is WebMD network and doctors. They serve the same function. So two entities which serve the same function. Okay, next sentence. In the legal world, three times as many disagreements each year amongst eBay traders are resolved using online dispute resolution than there are lawsuits. Again, so we are talking of the same kind of function, that is legal function. And an example is given of a particular entity, a private entity, versus the entire, governmental administrative legal system, the traditional versus the versus an example of the modern. On its sixth birthday, Huffington Post versus New York Times. So here you look at the fact that New York Times, again, it's not talking about the newspaper, unlike the previous examples. It is talking about New York Times website, not the paper which has been going on for like 1.5 century, right? So when they are talking of the New York Times, they are talking of their website. So here two websites are being compared. One is a very nascent organization, which probably began digital first, right? Which was digital to begin with, digital in the first place, and then a newspaper which has been one of the biggest newspapers, one of the most famous newspapers in the world for the longest time, and also have a digital edition. So here, two digital editions are being compared. So look at the diversity of examples, right? And what is common between them. Then the British tax authorities use a fraud detection system that holds more data than the British library. So again, here two public institutions, two probably governmental institutions are being talked of: British tax authorities, definitely governmental, and the British Library, right? So two public institutions are being compared, and the first one is explicitly digital. The second one could also very well be digital, and in any format, the first one exceeds the second one. Moving on. In 2014, the US tax authorities received electronic tax returns. Now, again, we are talking of tax, but here we are talking from the other end, from the users, the other party which interacts with the tax authorities. So, not the tax authorities, but the people when filing their taxes, right? So, people used an online software, and it's not comparing two institutions like with British tax authorities. It is talking of US taxpayers using software vis-a-vis US taxpayers using a physical tax professional, a human assistant. The architectural firm Gramazio and Kohler used a group of autonomous flying robots to assemble a structure out of 1,500 bricks. Again, here an explicit comparison is not made, but you can think of, okay, masons and bricklayers and construction workers. Here, flying robots are being used to do something that is conventionally human. The consulting firm Accenture has 750 hospital nurses on its staff. Again, it's a consulting firm. While Deloitte, founded as an audit practice 170 years ago, now has over 200,000 professionals and its own full-scale corporate university. So again, these are places where you don't expect these institutions to exist. So the last two or three lines, if you look at it, they don't talk of things explicitly digital with, say, Accenture or Deloitte, but what they're talking of is unconventional, uh, you know, recruitments, or unconventional staff, or unconventional human resources, or even unconventional service lines. So yeah, that's the overall idea. Now let's attempt the question. So the author of the above paragraph is trying to conclude something by citing different pieces of evidence, correct? What could the author be trying to prove? So let's take a look at all the five options and uh, just go through them one by one. Okay, first one, what old firms can do to survive. So, okay, let's just look at the word firm, right? So do we find that any of the examples in the excerpt, right, are not firms? And that's the reason I asked you to store all the information that you encountered in the passage as a summary, as an abstract summary of what those things are, what categories do they belong to, and basically an abstract chart of what two things are being compared. Is it two different uh, time frames of the same organization being compared, or a digital uh, uh, organization, a digital only entity or a digital focused entity being compared to a traditional focused entity, or the digital versions of an old versus new being compared, right? So we can see what is common to all of them. So not all of them are firms, first thing. For example, Harvard is not a firm, and US tax authorities are not a firm. There are government institutions mentioned, the US legal system, US court system is not a firm. So what old firms can do to survive? No. This is enough basis to eliminate it. Obviously, there can be there are other arguments to be made why A is wrong, but this is good enough, right? So if you want to quickly solve it, just that yeah, it's not just about firms and how old firms are dying. Again, it's not correct, right? So A and B can be eliminated just on the basis of firms. I can obviously elucidate on the other fronts on which options A and B are wrong, but this is good enough, right? So how automation is taking away jobs traditionally done by humans. So okay, how automation is taking away jobs traditionally done by humans. First thing, passage doesn't directly talk about automation. Obviously, it's common sense that with digitalization there will be automation and a lot of such things, right? But then, if you look at the Huffington Post and New York Times example, even that indirect assumption cannot be made, right? So in no place that it is explicitly stated, and with Huffington Post and New York Times, because New York Times has a website, right? It is mentioned here, website of the New York Times, right? So even the implicit assumption of automation accompanying digitalization cannot be. So this New York Times Huffington Post example is sufficient to eliminate option C, how automation is taking away jobs traditionally done by humans. I mean, there are many counterexamples that can be given. There are other problems with option C as well, but this is the quickest way to solve it. So yeah, we eliminate option C as well. Then we have option D, how new organizational how new organizational forms are emerging. So are all of these organizations, some of them are governmental bodies, some of are like authorities, some of them are firms of various kinds, news corporations, technology firms, consulting firms, tech consulting firms, digital health firms, and so on, right? So there are firms, there's a university there are authorities there, and people as a whole, taxpayers as an entity, taxpayers as a group being talked about, taxpayers and the services that taxpayers take. So no matter how we take it, right, um, we see that one thing that is common is all of them are organizational forms. So all of them are organizations, right? Even uh, and it's talking of new organizational forms where a team of uh, 5 people, yeah, sort of working from a garage could constitute a new organizational form. So D is by far the most general option here, and the one which covers the most number of examples, which does justice pretty much fairly a fair amount of relevance to all of the instances, all of the different pieces of evidence mentioned across the passage, right? So how new organization forms are emerging, and there are other upsides to it as well compared to other options, but this is the like test that we are going with to check whether uh, most of the options are covered or not. So D is the best option so far. Let's look at E, how professionals are getting replaced by technology. So yeah, this also seems a strong option, but for example, if you look at some of these examples, just think about it. Are there not people uh, involved at the back end? Are there not people who are uh, driving these online services? For example, online education, right? So, for example, I'm here, right, rather than being in person. So, if Harvard University floats an online course, right, it would be a person who would be teaching it, right? And in fact, that access has increased. It doesn't mean that the professor is replaced by AI, isn't it? Maybe in some ways the examiner is replaced, maybe some of the support staff are replaced, but the core remains the same, right? The last two, Accenture having nurses on its staff, This doesn't say anything about automation, right? Nothing. It doesn't say anything about replacement with technology. If anything, it says that Accenture now has 750 hospital nurses on its staff. Deloitte and Accenture, the last two, are just direct counterexamples to what is there in option E. So option E gets eliminated as well. So we eliminated option A, B, C, and E, and we laid out the merits of option B, and that's it. Option D is correct, right?